Hello everyone, my name is Eric Thomas. In this presentation I wanted to go into a little more depth about Module 3, which is the design and development of adult learning curriculum. As an instructional designer, we deal a lot with the ADDIE model as a process of designing and developing courses. So I kind of wanted to go into how these adult learning principles and characteristics have affected and been put to use in some of my course designs. So first off, as we see in many of our soft chalk modules, here's the andragogy model. I've kind of repurposed it and just put the basics as far as the shells in. And what I want to do is focus right here on the two outer rings, the goals and purposes for learning and the individual and situational differences, as really that's the main focus of Module 3. So what I want to do is kind of show you how some of these elements have affected some of my course or some of my design work as far as preparing and putting together courses. Fortunately, in a couple other of my classes in instructional design, I've had to design a few different courses, and I've chosen two that I've worked on this semester that kind of contrast each other pretty well and have different characteristics. This first one, just a brief background, is a fundamentals of fantasy football. We were just basically told to select a hobby or interest because that really wasn't the scope of the assignment. But we were designing a course that was basically, for this one, is a 5 to 6 week course, probably a general elective or something that's an independent study. Online format, just kind of a on its own course that somebody might be able to do, maybe a college, a general elective or something they would take. The hurricane preparation and readiness, this was actually prompted by a company, or the purpose was instigated by a company. We were preparing this for an insurance company that was seeing damage claims that were increasing, and they wanted to kind of do something, implement something to better educate their policyholders. I'm going to show you how these two kind of how they differ as far as the adult learning strategies. So first off, being the goals and purposes, we see institutional, societal, or individual growth. For the fantasy football course, this one's going to be more focused or more driven by the individual growth. Like I said, this is not really for any program or for a company. So the objectives, all the activities are kind of, they're driven by the needs and the purpose of the students. So for example, if your target audience is wanting more dynasty football, you can kind of cater the objectives there. If they want to learn more about daily format football, fantasy football, design the activities and assessment to cater towards that. The hurricane prep course, a little different. It's driven by a company. Like I said, it was built for an insurance company, so it's driven by institutional growth. What you're going to see there is the objectives. All the activities and assessments are kind of built to meet that institution's standards, what they're wanting to see come out of the course as far as the learning outcomes. Another aspect there is there is some external motivation included. When we built this course, the company didn't feel that just offering it itself that their policyholders would take the full advantage of the course, so they actually offered in some monetary incentive. They actually, if their policyholders completed the training and submitted all the assignments, they got a discount on their premium. So kind of a little added incentive or added element there that we took into account for. Now to go into that middle ring, which is your individual and situational differences. To start with, we look at the individual learner differences. We had a target audience in the two courses I've been speaking about. We didn't actually pilot test or implement them in either of the classes I was taking, but I kind of highlighted on two quotes I found in some articles I was reading that I thought was important here. First off is you have to identify what makes the learners tick and what compels them to prioritize and take action. And really, this gets into the motivation of the learner. Obviously, as adults, we're not really forced like you were as a kid to be taking a class, especially for the, both of these courses, the fantasy football and the hurricane preparation. The adult learners are not having to take this. It's not like they're having to take that hurricane prep class to keep their insurance. So it's important to know what's motivating them, why they're adjusting their schedule to take this course. Obviously there's a reason that's brought them there. Second off, learning. We see the quote: "Learning takes place best when it is tied to and built upon past experience." And obviously it's of big importance to take the new knowledge and skills that you're going to be teaching your learners and tie that in with their past experiences. For example, in the fantasy football, if they have prior football experience or possibly have even played fantasy sports in a different sport like fantasy baseball, your new knowledge they're going to learn that a lot better when you're able to incorporate what they already know in those. So, for example, we had some of our discussion boards that kind of built upon earlier sports knowledge and what they already knew about football. And also they were able to interact with the other students and speak about those matters. Next, we see the situational differences. Three key aspects I pointed out here is we see that adult learners often have multiple social roles and multiple responsibilities. They're probably, adults that have other jobs. They may be spouses, they may be parents, volunteers somewhere. Obviously, just taking the course or taking their college classes oftentimes is not their only responsibility. So it's something you got to account for. Got to look at time constraints. And that may be constraints just based off of the course, how it's to be implemented, or that may be the student or the learner time constraints. So, for example, our fantasy football, we had a 5 to 6 week window that we were implementing a training for, whereas the hurricane prep was kind of more of a one and done. They were going to get it done in basically a 2 to 4 hour window. So, one of the ways that kind of affected that course design was in a 2 to 4 hour window when the learners are coming and going basically at their own pace or at their desire. We couldn't really offer student-to-student interactivity. Couldn't do discussion boards because these policy holders for the insurance company were kind of coming and going and taking the class as it best fit their schedule. And lastly, we look at voluntary and compulsory. Why are they taking that course? Is it part of a program? Is it a job requirement? Are they doing it to move up in their job role? For both of my examples, the football and the hurricane class, that's mostly voluntary. Obviously, those are not probably established in any kind of program that they're required to take. So, for example, if you see like a nurse taking classes, they're probably taking an anatomy class because it's required by their program. So that's a reason they're bringing them there. For both of these classes, they're more voluntary, probably the adults taking them at their own will or at their own pace there. Lastly is the subject matter differences. Obviously, what you're teaching, the topic, is going to make a big difference on your course design. I think one of the first things you got to do in your curriculum design is to figure out what your learning outcome is. One of the articles described this as your real life destination. So what you want your learner to produce or to be able to do at the end of the class, and then you're going to roadmap the process to get them there. Also need to be aware of how complex or technical the content you're teaching is. Obviously, that's going to impact the format or the environment and how you're going to be able to teach it. And then also your instructional methods, like I said, your environment. the format your course is being taught, that's all going to kind of be impacted and dictated by the subject matter you're teaching. So fantasy football and the Hurricane Prep, we offered that in an online format. This was, it was pretty easy to offer it that way. Whereas if you were teaching something like school bus driving or welding, surgery, those kind of require a hands-on, probably face-to-face, at least in some sort of, hands-on simulated learning environment. Would not be the best bet to only offer a course like that online. For fantasy football, it's pretty easy to do. Our learning outcomes being we wanted the students to draft and play and interact in an actual league. So being that takes place already online, it was easy to set that up to where their assessments were they actually participated in a draft and provided reasons of why they made certain moves in a draft. The hurricane awareness was preparing them and making them ready for a storm, decreasing property damage. So obviously the format being an online format, it was beyond the scope of the course and really beyond the capability to teach them how to re-roof their house or how to build the shutters, hurricane-proof shutters. It was more making them aware that this was something that needed to be done prior to, hurricanes. So obviously that course content and the subject has a big influence on how you're going to teach the course and how you offer it. And lastly, here are my resources I use for this presentation. You can kind of go and review them as you have time. Hope everybody enjoyed the presentation and found it interesting and learned something from it. Thanks.